Happy Friday, folks. Senior Editor Mackenzie DeLulo here, and welcome back to the Texans Weekly Roundup. This week, the team discusses Florida Governor Ron DeSantis filing for Texas's 2024 Republican primary ballot, Representative Kyle Casal changing course on re-election and announcing he will not run again, oral arguments before the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals over Texas's Reader Act, parliamentary procedure in the Texas legislature and how it was tested in the 88th session, Border Patrol apprehending 21 sex offenders in the Del Rio sector in under 2 months, an Edinburgh man sentenced to 5 years in prison for smuggling meth in car batteries, the Libertarian Cato Institute ranking Texas the lowest in the nation for personal freedom, Mark Cuban selling his majority stake in the Dallas Mavericks to casino owner and advocate Miriam Adelson, Texas voters approving $37 billion worth of bonds in the November 2023 election, a Midland woman and her Mexican brother sentenced to decades in prison for drug trafficking, and several South Texas border officials switching parties and leaving the Democratic Party for the GOP. Thanks for listening and enjoy this episode. Howdy, folks. Mackenzie here with Brad, Cameron, Matt, and Hayden on another episode of the Weekly Roundup. We were, as usual, hamming it up about something that could be good fodder for the intro for the podcast before we started recording. So I was like, guys, we need to stop talking and record.
I say all of my most clever things before Mackenzie hits the record button. All of you miss out every week.
So helpful. Christmas shopping, though. I have not started a stitch of my Christmas shopping, like at all.
Which is strange for you.
It is.
Because you are the Christmas aficionado here.
I like to consider myself an elf, at this time of year. It's my favorite.
Okay. That's a comparison for you.
It's my favorite time of year. And Hayden has bought a gift, so he's batting 100 over me.
I have bought one gift, yes.
Yeah.
And I still have 25 days.
I know it's not batting 100.
Okay.
Don't get... I was hoping
my skin just crawled.
I was hoping you didn't hear me. Matt, what's going on over there?
Well, I was doing some interesting reading post Black Friday. Typically every Black Friday you see, the typical battles and blood being lit at 6 a.m. on the doorsteps of Best Buy. But didn't see a whole lot of that in the news or on social media this go around. And then I started seeing a lot of reports of, a lot of retail shops with sitting on lots of inventory, all that sort of stuff. So it piqued my curiosity because I wanted to know, what the economic impact of this Black Friday was over the previous year as sort of an economic indicator. Financial gurus are typically good about getting some preliminary data out pretty quick. So I did a look, and lo and behold, numbers were actually up over last year. But I think it was going down that rabbit hole a little bit that offered a better explanation. It was actually largely driven by online sales, including websites that feature buy now, pay later. And in addition, it was acquisitions by credit card. As a matter of fact, they had some interesting data out for the state of Texas. This ranks in the top 2, 3, 4, 5, something like that in states with the highest amount of credit card debt per person. So some interesting statistics there. So while Black Friday sales were up, from what it appears, it was largely attributed to online sales, buy now, pay later deals, and shoppers putting purchases on their credit cards.
Yeah.
So the more you know.
Yeah, I know. It's wild to think about how just a few years ago, Black Friday was marked by people just rushing to malls, and now people just are online buying on Amazon or whatever brand of their choice. It's pretty wild.
There was one video on Twitter I saw of someone, I think a Best Buy opening up, and just one dude strolls in, and that was it. There were all the 8 staff members were standing at the door waiting for this rush of people, and just one dude wanders in.
Wow.
Frankly, I am not sad that dynamic has departed Black Friday. People said they ruined Black Friday. Good. We don't need a stampede every Thanksgiving, the day after Thanksgiving.
Now we're really getting into the weeds, but the only time I ever actually physically went to Black Friday sales in person at a mall, I decided to wear, those like sock monkeys You know, the sock monkeys you have as kids?
Yeah.
A sock monkey onesie that a toddler would wear. And as a nearly 6 foot tall gal, certainly it was red. It was, I don't know why I chose to wear it. Just walking around the mall.
There's
like
a picture of you on People of Walmart somewhere.
Oh, 100%. I was giving off every bit of that, but it was a delightful time. Brad doesn't have a snarky comment. I'm going to quickly move on before he does. Brad, we will start with you, though, for our news for the week. We're getting closer to the filing deadline in Texas, and the 2024 presidential field is officially forming. Who filed this week?
So Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' campaign filed to put him on the Texas primary ballot this year. I guess that would be next year. Represented by surrogate state rep Matt Schaefer, who's been among the first endorsers of DeSantis at the state legislative level, and is very active in criticizing Donald Trump as the frontrunner and backing DeSantis as his preferred alternative. Nikki Haley's campaign also quietly filed this week as well, and then Trump's campaign filed a couple weeks ago. So those are the top 3 candidates in the race so far, and they are all on the Texas primary ballot. In filing, Schaefer said Donald Trump is rightfully focused on the bad things that happened to him at the end of his presidency and that are happening to him right now, but Ron DeSantis is focused on the future of the country, and there's a huge gap there. DeSantis is seen as the most formidable challenger to Donald Trump, who is the current frontrunner by a wide margin in most polls. A Texas Politics Project poll put Trump 50 points ahead of DeSantis in Texas, which is pretty much in line with national polling we're seeing on the question. The case for DeSantis largely boils down to the belief that Trump cannot beat Joe Biden in the general election, both in what happened in 2020 and in all the distractions that come with Trump as a politician and a candidate, but also that even if Trump did win the presidency, he could only serve one more term. Those are generally the arguments that DeSantis' camp is making. And, you know, they're trying to toe this line of, well, Trump is beloved in the Republican Party in most circles. We don't want to step on that third rail and, you know, go hard at criticizing him. Kind of like that's kind of the tact that Nikki Haley's taken.
Right.
Trying to carve out that niche, but also trying to differentiate himself from Trump. And as of now, if we're going based off the polling, it's not going well.
Yeah, which honestly, to me, reading Schaefer's comments to you was exactly what Schaefer was doing too.
Yep.
Of like, okay, yes, you know, Trump is rightfully focused on what happened to him at the end of his presidency, but here's why I support DeSantis. So very similar, even just rhetoric from his surrogate in Texas.
They have their messaging down for sure.
So how did the 2 candidates stack up financially?
The Trump campaign has raised $56 million this year, most of which came through a transfer from another committee. I couldn't find it exactly, but I assume it was his previous presidential committee that they probably raised money in during and after the 2020 election and transferred it to the 2024 committee. DeSantis, meanwhile, has raised $29 million. In the third quarter of 2023, this was an interesting data point. Trump only pulled 22 max out donations from Texans, while DeSantis had more than 200. It appears that the donor class in Texas and likely elsewhere is not enthralled with the former president, but does that even matter? If 2016 is any indication, probably not. He self-funded a lot back then. He could do it again now, although we'll see how much he's able to given certain other circumstances. But just because the donors do not like someone, that does not mean the voters don't. So we shall see.
Yeah. So what's next for this presidential race?
All eyes are on the Iowa caucuses right now. DeSantis and his team seem legitimately optimistic about winning that, something they really need to do to reestablish some momentum ahead of Super Tuesday. There are a couple other primaries like New Hampshire and South Carolina between Iowa and Super Tuesday, which I believe Texas is on. That's March 5th. But it's not necessarily a gauge for who's going to win the GOP nomination. The last time the GOP nominee won the Iowa caucuses was George W. Bush in 2000. Cruz won in 16, Santorum won in 12, and Huckabee won in 08. So while it isn't really a gauge for the eventual winner of the nomination, it can eliminate those down the pecking order trying to establish themselves as the challenger to the front runner, which is exactly what DeSantis needs and wants to do with the Iowa caucuses coming up. The biggest question, and I kind of alluded to this, comes from the politically charged indictments against Trump. Do they help or hurt his candidacy? They certainly helped him pull away from the GOP field. In polling, it's stark. You can see it in April, around the beginning of April this year. DeSantis is polling about 15 points behind Trump. And then all of a sudden, he shoots down and Trump shoots up. And that was when the indictments were announced. So that certainly had an effect. Does it have an effect on the general election voter should he win the GOP nomination? I don't know. We'll see. But also, do the millions in legal costs hurt Trump's ability to finance his campaign down the stretch? I guess we'll see.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Lots to consider. Thank you, Bradley. Hayden, coming to you with some more news out of the Texas House this week. Why did State Representative Kyle Casal change his mind about running for re-election?
It's always interesting when a member of the Texas legislature decides to run for re-election, then changes his mind. State Representative Kyle Casal, who went to a runoff in his last Republican primary, initially announced in September that he planned to run for a 7th term in the legislature. But just this week, he decided that he would instead choose to retire. Casal announced in September that he would run for re-election, touting his record specifically on public education and other issues. This week, however, he said that he would be stepping aside. He also seemed to take a shot at the way the legislature is currently functioning. He said that there would not be any productivity coming out of pandering, grandstanding, or stoking divisions. This is on the heels of the school choice debate and the Ken Paxton impeachment. Interestingly enough, Casal did not take down his announcement that he would be running for re-election from his Twitter account. So he still has pinned on his profile his re-election announcement, but he did issue a statement, and his campaign did confirm to the Texan that he is not running for another term. The filing deadline for the primary election is on December 11, which is less than 2 weeks from now.
Wow. So what was the political backdrop of Casal's decision?
Casal was in a tricky position. He is in a tricky position. He backed an amendment by Representative John Rainey to remove education savings accounts, aka vouchers, from the public education bill. He also voted for the impeachment of Ken Paxton, putting him on the wrong side of a lot of grassroots Republicans. Governor Abbott backed Casal in the 2022 primary, even against a primary challenger who was endorsed by Representative Ben Lamont. Amid all of this, there was redistricting going on, and Ben Lamont thought Casal was not conservative enough. Casal had backed the expansion of Medicaid back in the 87th legislature, so there was a lot going on there, but Abbott still backed him. This time, Abbott released a slate of endorsements after the school choice vote and did not back Casal, signaling that this vote had put him on the wrong side of the governor. So that possibly could have played into his decision.
Yeah, absolutely. Could this be an omen for how Abbott's opponents will fare in the primary? I mean, we've talked a lot about impeachment and school choice being two of the lightning rod issues going into this primary.
It's not good. Abbott's a tough competitor. He is known for his fundraising prowess and his ability to resonate with conservatives. He is passionate about school choice and school vouchers. It is not a surprise that Casal is choosing not to fight this uphill battle with the governor. Abbott has already promised that he was going to make it difficult for people who did not support ESAs and school vouchers. However, in his statement announcing that he was reversing his decision to run for re-election, Casal said he believes that these past legislative sessions were among the most conservative in Texas history, and he took a great deal of the credit for that and said that he was proud of his track record.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots to consider going into the primary. It's going to be fascinating.
We've seen some movement in that since afterwards, too. Abbott, after Casal announced his retirement, endorsed Trey Wharton, who had already declared to challenge Casal. And then we saw John Harvey Slocum, who ran against Rainey in 22, announce yesterday for Casal's district. So already a lot of movement following that domino falling.
Absolutely.
And it's fascinating that Abbott waited until after Casal decided not to run again.
It was odd. Yeah. I'm not sure why that happened.
It's almost as though he was saying, I'm not going to support you, but let's wait and see before I pick a fight.
Well, we still have a little bit of time too with the filing deadline. So who else is entering? Who will be Abbott's chosen candidate in some of these races where he is not endorsing the incumbent? That's going to be fascinating.
Abbott is very shrewd. He does not do things on a whim. He does not lash out. He thinks about what he's going to do, and he's very strategic. That's how he's maintained the power that he has maintained for many years.
Well, and maybe he was discussing with Casal about whether he was going to run and didn't want to explicitly, come out and whack him over the head with an endorsement of Wharton. And instead was like,
right.
I might, if you're announcing retirement, then I'll wait to endorse until after you retire, since I did endorse you last session. Who knows?
Abbott's passionate about school vouchers, but not to his own detriment.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll see how this all pans out. Thank you, Hayden. Cameron, coming to you. The Reader Act has continued to face legal challenges. Give us the latest update on all of that's going down.
Yeah, this time, oral arguments were had in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans, and this is just another action that HB 900 has seen in this legal process. First, we saw a lawsuit that was filed on behalf of bookstores and publishers against the Texas State Library and Archives Commission, the Texas Board of Education, the TEA, or the Texas Education Agency. And these bookstores and publishers were challenging the Reader Act because it will prevent book vendors from selling sexually explicit material to public school libraries. So initially, a judge blocked the bill from going into effect. Then there was a motions panel for the Fifth Circuit that ordered an administrative stay that allowed the law to be implemented while court proceedings were being had. And we finally got an update on that this week. And so during the oral arguments, the state argued that the Reader Act is not a book ban, and the law, quote, does not force the plaintiffs to associate with the ratings. That was a big point of contention between the two sides in this debate, where the plaintiffs, the book vendors, their attorney was arguing that the law is, quote, impossibly vague, and continued to accuse the law of applying a, quote, arbitrary framework. And so there was an interesting point, though, that was brought up by the state's attorney, because there is a portion in the law that talks about what is called community standards. And the plaintiffs in the case were wondering, how can a community standard be applied statewide? There's different districts, there's millions of students. How would a book vendor be able to apply community standards to such a large population? But the state's attorney brought up a Supreme Court case, Miller v. California, to argue that obscene material as it relates to community standards can be taken as a statewide standard. And thus, they argued a restraint on book vendors does not violate the First Amendment protections of free speech. So oral arguments wrapped up this week. We don't have a decision yet, but the case is now submitted to the court, and we wait until a determination is rendered.
Yeah, absolutely, Cameron. Thank you. Hayden, our first piece published this week was from you on parliamentary procedure. Let's walk through it. What are some of your observations about how the Texas legislature functions under its rules of order?
Life is too short to spend too much of it worrying about parliamentary procedure, so I'll keep this segment short. The legislature does not function under Robert's Rules of Order. It uses its own rules manual, but uses the same parliamentary procedure principles that are outlined in Robert's Rules, many of the same principles. Legislators do not follow their own rules to a T, which can create confusion and false expectations at times on the part of members. Sometimes they need to, I don't say they need to, they bend the rules to create certain policy outcomes. They go to the limits of what is allowable under their own rules. I wrote a piece explaining some of the dynamics in the House and some of the different ways that they use their rules to accomplish their objectives. And I encourage those who are interested in that topic and interested in learning more about how the House works and how legislation reaches the finish line to head to our website and check out that article.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there any insight that we can glean from how Speaker Phelan exercises his discretion from the dais?
Speaker Phelan has a lot of power as the elected speaker. He's different in the way he runs the House than the way Lieutenant Governor Patrick runs the Senate, because he must maintain a coalition of support within the House membership. He cannot lose the support of a majority of House members or he loses his speakership. On the other hand, Dan Patrick is elected by the public. So frankly, he can run the Senate as he chooses and does not necessarily face any repercussions from within his own chamber. Speaker Phelan has used his power in various ways this session, such as when he prohibited Tony Tinderholt from approaching the back microphone with parliamentary inquiries, or his decision not to reprimand Armando Wally for accosting Cody Harris on the House floor during a scuffle over debate on amendments. There are interesting contrasts in the way Speaker Phelan has approached different outbursts in the chamber. He has emphasized order in the chamber on days such as when there were outbursts over the transgender procedures legislation when he cleared the gallery. I discuss a lot of that in the piece. And again, I recommend that people read it if that interests you.
Yeah, absolutely. How does all of this affect the actual policy outcomes? You kind of were talking about it a little bit.
Well, the rules are not intended to directly impact what policies take place, and they are designed to be fair and not favor certain policies over others. But sometimes lawmakers will break the rules to manipulate policies, such as when they go on a quorum bust and try to keep the House from doing business by not showing up for floor sessions. Although there are times when there are legitimate ways to put an end to a bill, such as raising a point of order. Brad has reported on that before extensively, how points of order have been used during this legislature to kill legislation. And it has been fascinating to watch all of that play out. But I cite a lot of examples of that in the article.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that is not new. Happens anytime there's a speaker in the House, right? I mean, the accusations of, you enforced this rule and not this one, that happens all the time. It just is in different fonts with each new speaker that comes into the House. So not something we're very used to seeing it, and it's not something that's new, but it is unique to each individual speaker. So definitely worth going and checking out at the Texan.news. Thank you, Hayden. Matt, we're coming to you. The U.S. Border Patrol announced the arrest of 21 sex offenders attempting to enter the U.S. illegally in just under a 2-month period. Give us the details.
As the surge of illegal entrances into the United States from Mexico overwhelms state and federal law enforcement, U.S. Customs and Border Protection was forced to close off multiple ports of entry in Texas to vehicle traffic on Monday this week, with the agency having to redirect personnel to respond to unlawful entry activity elsewhere along the Rio Grande. Among those caught attempting to illegally enter the United States during this surge and this past year, thousands possess criminal records from other countries for offenses similar to American criminal laws, including sex crimes. According to Chief Patrol Agent Juan Bernal, the Del Rio sector in Texas has apprehended 21 sex offenders in a less than 2-month period. The Del Rio sector, for reference, includes just a 245-mile stretch of the southern border, along with some 47 Texas counties. Customs and Border Protection compiles data by fiscal year, running from October 1st through the end of September of any given year, regarding encounters with illegal aliens who possess prior criminal records. Among the thousands of criminal encounters, 284 were apprehended in fiscal year 2023, they had committed sex offender-related crimes prior to their apprehension by Border Patrol. 19 have been apprehended in fiscal year 2024 to date. So combining those 19 with the others within just the past 2 months, there's a total of 21. Chief Bernal praised the work of his agents in continuing to apprehend criminals, including the recent sex offenders attempting to illegally cross the southern border.
Absolutely. Matt, thanks so much for your coverage. Brad, coming to you, a case at the Texas Supreme Court between local governments involves a dispute over governmental immunity. What are the details?
In 2017, the San Jacinto River Authority, which governs water supply in that river basin, raised its rates for contracted municipalities in order to pay off bond debt incurred by the entity. Cities of Conroe and Magnolia objected to the rate increase, citing a year of heavy rainfall that would reduce scarcity in the water supply, thereby, or should, reducing the premium paid for water. They refused to pay the higher rates and sued the SJRA over the rate increase. SJRA countersued, which a trial court dismissed, finding that the cities had governmental immunity from suit. SJRA has $500 million in outstanding bond debt, 80% of which is backed by the state, and they are hoping to secure the payment from these cities and prevent any other cities from doing the same, objecting to paying these rate increases in order to pay off that amount. But yeah, it's in front of the Texas Supreme Court. Oral arguments will be heard on that case in January.
Has the court ruled on governmental immunity before?
Yes, there have been, I'm sure, many, but most recently, Scodex ruled that ERCOT possessed immunity from suits brought in civil court and could only be filed against with the PUC. I'm unsure how that will apply to this situation, as you have different kinds of entities, but still you have governmental entities involved. The court did, however, in that case, reverse a lower court's ruling on the question. The state of Texas joined that suit on behalf of ERCOT. If that were to happen again, they would rule that in reverse that these cities lack immunity from suit and therefore go the opposite way that they went with ERCOT. Again, it's a different circumstance, so whether that's the right or wrong decision, that's a different issue, but it would be interesting to see the court in such a short amount of time rule an opposite way on this broad question that a lot of people are wondering about.
Yeah, absolutely. Where is the state on this issue?
The state of Texas and the Texas Water Development Board filed an amicus brief backing SJRA in this dispute, arguing that not only do the local governments lack immunity in this case, but that the ruling with the cities would jeopardize the state's ability to finance and build more water supply infrastructure. The water supply problem is probably one of the biggest in the state that nobody really knows about. We all have heard about the power grid, right? Something similar applies to water supply. The rate at which Texas is expanding in population is seriously outpacing the rate at which we're expanding our water supply. And if I remember correctly, by 2070, we're going to have significantly more population than can be supplied with what we have in water or what we have in the queue. And it takes decades to build a new reservoir, for example, like the Marvin Nichols Reservoir, which I've written about as a particularly heated example, but it would take land in East Texas that people own out there, build a reservoir, flood it from these converging rivers, and use that to supply water to Dallas-Fort Worth. So it's competing interests. What do you do? It's a hard question, but that is an example of why it is so difficult to build new water supply in the states. But more people are coming every day. So the cities countered to the state's contention there that it's nonsense and that the amount of money here is not even close to that $500 million that SJRA is claiming. It's a fraction of that. It's a segment. And so it'll be interesting to see what the court does. But like I said, oral arguments are, I believe, January 9th. So next year we'll see some movement and then probably a ruling on that later on.
We really should use the word nonsense more often.
I agree.
Yeah, it's just a classic. That's my takeaway from your story, Bradley.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Anything pertaining to
No, just the nonsense part. Yeah. Okay, great.
Cool.
Hayden, we're coming
That's probably
to
how everyone else felt while reading it.
I wasn't going to say it, Brad. It's a very fascinating story.
It should be,
It
even
is.
though it isn't.
Oh my Lanta. Maybe we're just on your intellectual level.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that.
Yeah, I'm sitting here thinking about Whoppers that that Joe Hootman sent us in a package the other day. That's what I'm thinking about.
My mind went to Burger King Whoppers.
Oh.
I'm hungry.
Mine did too, but maybe I'm just hungry.
Yeah. Ditto. Okay, Hayden, we're coming to you. Is it true that someone tried to smuggle meth across the border in car batteries?
Believe it or not, yes, that did happen.
Wow.
Federal prosecutors announced that an individual from Edinburgh faced sentencing on charges that he attempted to smuggle methamphetamine across the southern border through the Hidalgo port of entry in a Dodge Ram 2500 in car batteries. The contraband totaled 20 kilograms of methamphetamine. The narcotics were detected by drug sniffing dogs. The individual driving the vehicle was taken into custody by Border Patrol. Amusingly, this person tried to say that he thought it was marijuana, but prosecutors said that that was not believable and he was basically full of it. So,
and so were the car batteries.
So were the car batteries. That was good. That was very good. There were a total of 8 bundles of meth concealed in his vehicle. After laboratory testing, they determined the quantity of the drugs, and he was taken care of by police.
Yeah. So what sentence did this drug smuggler receive?
The federal judge sentenced him to 60 months in prison plus another 5 years of supervised release. I will mention that this individual is from Edinburgh, and this was also the site of President Trump's recent stop with Governor Abbott, where Abbott endorsed Trump for president. Trump has said that drug dealers should be executed. It is one of his more staunch stances that he has taken, and he has often pointed to China as an example that the U.S. should follow on this policy of executing drug dealers. Our policy now is much less severe than that. And I would also point out that there is a difference too between a drug dealer and somebody who runs a drug trafficking organization or a higher up in a criminal cartel. This person, it sounds like, was just I'm not trivializing it at all, but in terms of the grand scheme of things, this was somebody who was running drugs across the border as a drug dealer.
Certainly. Hayden, thank you. Cameron, coming to you. Cato, a libertarian policy think tank, ranked states according to how public policies affect individual freedoms, and they had Texas ranked in some very surprising ways. Give us the details.
Yeah, that's right. This recent analysis by the Cato Institute measured how all 50 states compared on a variety of personal and economic freedoms. And they found that Texas, while ranking near the top of the list for overall freedom, was dead last for personal freedom. Thought this was very interesting. They pointed out that Texas's criminal justice policies are, quote, generally aggressive, in that their cannabis laws are not only harsh, but they said they are the worst in the country. And we saw during the regular legislative session, there was an attempt to make some changes to how marijuana policy is enforced in the state. But even though it did pass on the floor, I'm talking about House Bill 218, which would have lowered penalties for marijuana possession. It was sent to a Senate committee, but was never which is typical of marijuana-related legislation in the Texas legislature. Another point of the Cato analysis is they spotlighted the state's restrictions on gambling, as well as calling educational freedom in the state, quote, meager. And we'll hear more about some of the gambling and casino related issues later in the podcast. But as we all know, the debate over education has continued to heat up, especially with the John Rainey amendment that we saw to HB1 that stripped education savings accounts out of the omnibus House education bill. So those are some points that Cato had pointed to as restrictions on personal freedom. Texas, according to Cato, dropped one spot in 2023 to 17th on the list of states with the highest overall freedom. And they said because of the state's high rating at number 6 for economic freedom, it was able to overcome its low personal freedom score. And just the states that topped this list for Cato on overall freedom, it was New Hampshire, then followed by Florida and South Dakota. And then not surprisingly, at the bottom of the list was New York, Hawaii, and California, my old state. So it was an interesting analysis, a bit surprising where they put Texas, but because of the state's high economic freedom rating, it was still near the top of the list in overall freedom.
Yeah. Fascinating stuff, Cameron. Thank you so much. Speaking of gambling, nice segue for us, Cam. Hayden, what is this deal that we've heard Mark Cuban struck with casino gambling mogul Miriam Adelson?
Dallas Mavericks owner Mark Cuban reportedly is proceeding with a sale of the Dallas Mavericks to casino gambling mogul Miriam Adelson, who is the widow of the late Sheldon Adelson, a prolific supporter of former President Donald Trump and a prolific donor to the Trump campaign. Adelson filed SEC paperwork to sell $2 billion in Las Vegas Sands stock to go to the sale or the purchase, of a professional sports team. However, the SEC filing itself did not specifically mention the Dallas Mavericks. Mark Stein, a sports reporter, is credited with originally reporting that the transaction in question would be the purchase of a majority stake in the Dallas Mavericks franchise for less than $4 billion. Notably, Forbes assesses the value of the Mavericks at just at $4.5 billion in its most recent estimate. The sale will likely happen in the middle of the NBA season. An interesting development for an iconic North Texas basketball team.
Yeah, absolutely. What is the significance of the Adelsons owning such an important icon here in Texas?
The Adelson family, Miriam Adelson, has sought and lobbied to have the Texas legislature pass a proposition to put on the ballot for Texas voters to decide whether to allow a limited number of commercial casinos in the state of Texas. We have reported on those efforts extensively here. There have been hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars contributed to Texas politicians in an effort to persuade them to see the advantages of commercial casinos and limited legalized recreational gambling here in the state of Texas, as opposed to philanthropic gambling or the state-run Texas lottery. Mark Cuban himself has said in the past that he wants to create an arena in North Texas with a casino resort complex attached. This would require an amendment to the Texas Constitution, which prohibits the construction of commercial casinos and virtually all other types of gambling, except for limited exceptions that are carved out, such as the state lottery. Those lobbying efforts were unsuccessful in the most recent legislative sessions. It is clear, however, that Miriam Adelson is not giving up on her effort to really honor her husband's legacy of bringing commercial casinos and the Las Vegas Sands brand to the Lone Star State.
Yeah, absolutely. Worth watching for sure, Hayden. Thank you so much. Brad, coming to you. There were hundreds of bond proposals on the November ballot. How'd they turn out?
So of the 307 or so bond proposals, there was a total of, as of data from the Bond Review Board, $42 billion in spending on the ballot. And of that, only $5 billion of that total was voted down. The vast majority of the total approved were school bonds or water district bonds, like MUDs we talked about before. I have a whole list of the Bond Review Board's data on the in the article that you can see how each one fared. Maybe in your area, if you had propositions on the ballot. Interestingly, with a lot of those MUDs, as we talked about, it only takes one, maybe two voters in that election to approve sometimes millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in spending. And there was one that stuck out to me that failed because there were a grand total of two voters in that race, and one went for, one went against, so it didn't eclipse 50% and failed. Just an odd situation. But the overall, you can see the data, look at how much was approved, broken down by type of entity. Again, it was mostly school districts as per usual, and in this case, water districts. So check it out. You might find something that was on your ballots in there.
Good stuff.
Cool.
Great. Hayden, coming to you, is it true that some drug trafficking story we reported on this week was a family affair?
Yes, it was. Some people play board games with their families. Others engage in high-level, multi-million-dollar drug trafficking organizations.
Oh, gosh.
A Midland woman and her Mexican brother were recently sentenced to prison after prosecutors say they participated in the same drug trafficking organization. The U.S. Department of Justice announced that the two were sentenced in the scheme, which implicated four other defendants who were sentenced as early as February of 2020. Over the course of 2 years, according to prosecutors, these two individuals, these two siblings, were smuggling drugs and hiring others to smuggle drugs. The Midland defendant here used her home, made her residence in Midland available to this drug trafficking organization as a type of home base for these unlawful activities. I do think it's interesting here that these two siblings are of different nationalities. That is not something that I see very often when I'm parsing through these Justice Department news releases. The sentences in this case were severe, but some fascinating news out of I believe a Del Rio courthouse is where these individuals were sentenced.
Talk to us about the sentence that these individuals face.
Well, the Midland defendant received a sentence of 262 months, which I believe I did the math the other day. I think that's just over 20 years. And then the Mexican defendant received a sentence of 324 months. So a long time behind bars for these drug trafficking activities.
Absolutely. Hayden, thank you. Matthew, coming to you. 3 South Texas local officials have left the Democratic Party in a growing trend to join the Texas GOP. Give us the rundown.
That's right, Mackenzie. Project Red Texas, which is an organization that recruits candidates to run for office as Republicans, has recently announced 3 incumbent county officials have decided to leave the Democratic Party and join the Republican Party of Texas. The most recent official, Kennedy County Attorney Allison Strauss, who follows the Kleberg County Attorney, Kira Talib Sanchez, in making the party switch. Sanchez had cited the ongoing crisis at the southern border and a far-left swing in the Democratic Party, ideologically wise, among her reasons for changing parties. We previously reported on Karnes County Sheriff Dwayne Villanueva switching parties last year, and now Pecos County Sheriff Thomas Perkins has also decided to make the switch, once again citing border security and the job Governor Greg Abbott has done in being an ally to local officials faced with dealing with the border crisis. Lastly, Project Red Texas also announced Terrell County Precinct 3 Commissioner Arnulfo Cerna is also switching parties to become a Republican. And according to the organization, the move further cemented Republican control of the large border county commissioner's court.
There you go, Matt. Thank you so much for your coverage. Okay, before we move on to our tweetery here, I want to highlight a few stories here from our team that does not reside here in Austin. I'm going to go with Holly Hansen here. She has a great story on Harris County Judge Lena Hidalgo facing criminal abuse of office, a complaint referred to the Texas Rangers. Fascinating story up there from Holly Hansen, and definitely worth going and checking out. Holly, as usual, is at the forefront of all things Harris County and many stories throughout the state, but definitely worth going and checking out. Kim Roberts from North Texas, the DFW area, reported on the Texas Attorney General's office arguing before the state Supreme Court here in Texas to protect pro-life laws, giving a rundown of some of these oral arguments. Definitely worth going and checking out. We've covered this extensively at the Texan. This is just another move here in this ongoing saga. And then Seth Moorhead wrote Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex passing 8 million residents, a fascinating story on just population growth in the state and looking specifically at some North Texas numbers. So go check all of those out at thetexan.news as well. Okay, our tweetery section. Cameron, I want to start with you. What did you find online this week?
Well, as usual, I come across a lot of different things. A lot of interesting stuff. I found this story about Jeff Bezos, who he has his hands in all sorts of things. And for some reason, he's building a giant clock in a West Texas mountain. Matt, do you know about this giant clock?
I had no clue this was happening until you just mentioned it. Oh, I also just realized you said Matt and not Mac. Continue, Matt.
Matt, you know about this, though?
Yes, as a matter of fact, it's not far from me.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, this 10,000-year clock, it's going to tick. Like, there's different markers, like on the first year, 10, 100, 10,000. And so apparently he has invested $42 million into this giant clock.
Yeah, it's a big project.
What's that?
It's a big project.
Yeah. I had no idea before I came across this, but
yeah, he has a ranch just north of me, where they do both the rocket launches and occasionally whenever they're launching a rocket, I can see it from my place. And then he owns part of a mountain, I guess, on that ranch where they're doing this clock.
So this is obviously a long-term project, 10,000 years in the future. He's expecting this clock to be around. So at least he's an optimist.
Yeah, that's right.
So I just thought this was pretty interesting.
That's
building a giant clock in a mountain.
That makes me immediately think about, like, if we had Jeff Bezos type money, what kind of oddity would we fund and build? Like a clock in a West Texas mountain that just exists forever. That's a fun one, right? What a legacy. Random in the middle of nowhere, but amazing.
I don't know why, but I'm thinking of that movie, The Time Machine, where the guy from the 1800s makes the time machine and he fast forwards and goes to a public library and there's this machine thing that talks to him or whatnot that's like a library source, and then he gets back on the time machine and goes far in the future, and now it's in a cave in the mountain, but that library is that AI library assistant is still there and remembers. I don't know why I'm thinking of that,
but it's fun.
Have y'all seen that movie?
No, but I'm not a great audience for being asked what movies I've seen, but no, I've not.
Okay,
sorry about it.
Not a good reference then.
Yeah, there you go. Brad, you said you'd build a parking garage.
Of course, yeah. That's my dream.
How is that an oddity?
I mean, last time I mentioned this on the podcast, I got berated by you.
That's not my question.
It is probably in the category.
That podcast happened within a few weeks of me moving to Austin and starting in the office, and it was legendary. Everyone, go scroll wherever you're listening to this, scroll all the way back to January 2021. And I can't remember which week it was.
Was it January? Okay, that's helpful. Because
It
I was looking for this
because
the
it
other
was
day.
one of the first podcasts that I was here in the office after starting here in the office.
Wow.
So go back. I think it was the third or fourth week of January that they had this discussion, but it was
very impressed that you know that.
It had to be. I mean, my memory, I'm told, is not awesome. So it could be.
It's way better than mine.
Week,
we know that. Okay. Well, I'm going to want to go back and find that because we almost need to bookmark our episodes.
We do.
That are particularly notable with inter-office squabbles.
Although I don't know if there's a function on. I listen to my stuff on Spotify. I don't know where everyone else does, but
same. Which Spotify does not have good search features to find.
It does not. You have to do weird things with the search filters to find what you're looking for. But.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll go back and find it now that I know the ballpark era that this was recorded in.
The ballpark era.
I'm going to think about my oddity. Maybe we can come back to that at the end if we have time. As an oddity we would build if we had Jeff Bezos type money. I think it's fantastic. Okay. Matthew, an animal fact. I'm excited about this. Tell us about your tweetery this week.
Well, I was scrolling through old, formerly Twitter, now known as X, and I came across a tweet by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service noting that yesterday, or Wednesday, was International Jaguar Day. Not the car, but the cat with all the funny-looking spots. The big cat, that is, so to speak. And that reminded me of a research paper that I'd stumbled across a while back. So I had to go and dig it up and share a tidbit of fun fact. Most people think of a jaguar as one of the big cats that you would ordinarily see like in Africa or maybe South America, etc. But it is actually a native species to Texas. As a matter of fact, from probably central Texas on down to South Texas, that was part of the big cat's original native range. And it was eventually, because of like farming and ranching, et cetera, and loss of habitat, it was eventually made extinct in the state of Texas. But we're not talking about a long time ago. We're talking about the last jaguar in Texas was killed by someone who was out hunting rabbits near, I think it was McAllen. No, Kingsville. I'm sorry. It was near Kingsville in 1947. So, pretty interesting fact. Just not that long ago, the possibility of running into a jaguar in the wild in Texas was amongst the realm of possibilities.
Wow. Well, it does make sense in some way, too. If jaguars are located in South America, that they would have in some way, shape, or form been seen in the American Southwest. So that's really fascinating.
And I guess maybe there's a characteristic between the two cats that made, mountain lions give them the ability to, continue on and thrive in Texas, whereas the jaguar, for some reason, got eradicated. I don't know if it's a behavioral trait that they're just not as elusive.
Or just
as
habitat.
The mountain lions are.
The mountain lions live on all sorts of places. They're all over the place.
I mean, the mountain lion is just kind of proving to be worldwide a very enduring species. So
yeah, certainly. Well, I love an animal fact. Thank you so much, Matthew. Do we have more? Well, let's end.
You love an animal fact when it's not me saying the animal facts.
Actually, I was just about to compliment you on yours and say we should end on it because it's an animal fact as well.
Oh,
so,
okay.
Joke's on you.
Joke's on me, indeed.
Hayden.
Yes.
Let's talk about your tweetery, and I'm shocked to see that Kyle Rittenhouse is involved.
Well, I will say as a reporter, there are some stories that give me a headache because I like to stick with what I know and what I can verify. Sadly, with this case, there are so many claims and so many different accusations going in so many different directions that it is hard to verify each individual thing. Last week, I mentioned that Kyle Rittenhouse is publishing a book purporting to be the tell-all of what happened with his case. He is involved in Texas politics, which is one of the reasons I mentioned this. I did not pitch it as a story because a lot of this is social media hearsay. So I don't think this is story worthy. That's why I didn't pitch it, but I wanted to touch on it in Tweetery just to mention some of the things that are going on here. Kyle Rittenhouse was involved in the incident with white supremacist Nick Fuentes in October when he issued a statement denying that he was part of any meeting with Nick Fuentes. And he said that he wanted to leave work and be away from that situation. Kyle Rittenhouse is a spokesperson for Texas Gun Rights, which is obviously a pro-gun organization here in Texas. Rittenhouse was part of actively lobbying against a bill that would have increased the age to purchase a semi-automatic rifle here in Texas to 21. Rittenhouse has been involved in Texas politics. He is now coming out with this book that purports to tell his side of the story of what happened in Kenosha on August 25th, 2020. However, Twitter accounts that appear to be legitimate because they're interacting with other accounts that are legitimate accounts of people who were close to Rittenhouse and who were his closest allies, including his sisters and others who were close to him, are disputing many of the things that he wrote in that book. So I would encourage people to read that information, read the counter arguments, and make your own decision about what is a reasonable statement of fact and what seems to align with the evidence that was presented at that trial. Rittenhouse does have civil litigation pending against him. The criminal trial was not the end of the story. So he has a lot of legal troubles still on the horizon. There will be a lot of factual things to be sorted out during these civil trials. So I did mention the book last week, so I wanted to come back to that and just say, make sure that you are taking all of this, including all the things that have been said against him, all of the things that have been said making the case for him, to take those with a grain of salt and vet those facts for yourself. Because when there are so many different narratives trying to be put out there about a particular person and so many caricatures about a person and the people around them, it's so important to stick to the facts. And that's really the only point I wanted to emphasize. And I just felt like I needed to come back to that since I mentioned it on the podcast last week.
Yeah, certainly worth noting. And Twitter has been ablaze with some of that. And some of it's been harder to find. Like, it's been hidden and you've been shooting that over. And it's fascinating to watch all this discourse happen around this book. So, Hayden, thank you. I'm going to go next. So Brad and his animal facts can go last because I'm placing him at a position of honor, as I don't usually.
Cool.
That is true.
He says cool to that. It's okay. I don't need to be thanked for that. I can just, that's fine. Hey, we're good, Brad.
Yeah, don't expect one.
Great. I have two notable things that I saw on Twitter this week. One, Elon Musk made headlines this week after at a panel event, basically telling advertisers who refuse to advertise on X, formerly known as Twitter, the platform that he acquired. I believe it was last year. Was it last year that happened? Yeah, last year.
Wow.
Okay.
It feels like eons ago. Elons ago?
I knew you were
Elons
gonna
ago.
say that. Oh my gosh. But basically saying that these advertisers who are opting out of advertising on X are trying to, quote, blackmail him. He said, go F yourself about these advertisers. I know. Wild. But also interesting to see that this is becoming more and more of a trend in an age where advertising dollars have been wielded as almost a political hammer in some ways of saying, okay, this is something that we disagree with, something you did politically. So therefore us X corporation are going to withhold our advertising dollars or withdraw our advertising dollars from your platform. We even see Dana White, the CEO and president of the UFC, kind of say similar things where an advertiser, I think it was Peloton, came at them for something they were doing, saying we disagree with either who you're letting advertise with you or some stance you took as an organization. Can you change this? And he was like, no, like don't advertise with us if you don't like it, which is something that is becoming more and more popular, but we have not seen as much until recently, where previously advertising dollars were king in a lot of ways, where you're like, okay, we bow to the, trends of what our advertisers want and need. And I think there's some middle ground being found now among organizations that may not explicitly align with some of the more corporate entities that seem to be prevailing nowadays, and also facing criticism. So it goes both ways, but that was really fascinating to watch. And Elon Musk is just a wild card. So anything he does or says is fascinating. And he does live in Texas now. Another thing, Alec Murdaugh, I've talked a lot about this case. His financial crimes were the subject of the latest trial he was involved in after being sentenced to serving 2 consecutive life sentences for the murder of his wife and son. He's now serving 27 years on top of that for the financial crimes he was unbelievably accused of perpetrating. So basically, he's just in prison.
You and I could do a podcast series on Alec Murdaugh just by itself.
Yeah, I know. I'm reining myself in from saying more details than that. Yeah.
Special edition on the Texan of something that has nothing to do with Texas, but that we're interested in anyway.
That we like. Yeah, I would also encourage folks interested in this case at all, or in the Murdaugh family at all. You may have seen the Netflix special, etc., or just things online, articles written, to go listen to Judge Newman's parting words with Alec Murdaugh at the very end of the sentencing. So pretty fascinating and noteworthy little speech there that he gave.
That statement from the bench will probably be the epilogue to all of this, because that was probably the last state courtroom sentencing of Murdaugh, if I'm correct about that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And federal courtrooms are not live streamed, and I think they've wrapped up the federal stuff anyway. So
yeah,
that was probably the last of it.
Yeah. And a worthwhile one for sure. Okay, Bradley, your animal fact.
My animal fact. Well, it overlaps with the power grid. So that's
It's disappointing.
Piqued my interest.
Okay.
There was an outage. Gasp, an outage. Thank you. In Austin, about 4,000 people were out of power for a bit, and it turns out it was because a rascally little squirrel bit a transformer, I assume causing the squirrel to blow into smithereens, but also breaking the power line. And
the transformer blowing is no joke.
It was Hammy from Over the Hedge, wasn't it?
Oh my gosh, I love Hammy from Over the Edge.
It had to be.
Oh, it's such a good movie.
He drank an energy drink, a Red Bull.
The
Rest
slow
in peace.
motion of Hammy when he's just like going normally, and it's slow motion for him in that movie. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Isn't it the other way around? Isn't he going normally and everything else is slow around
That's
him?
what I attempted to say.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
Yes.
I don't get the movie reference. Sorry, Mac.
That's okay, Matt. You had a really good one earlier. This is now our movie reference. Over the Hedge.
It was a great movie. I agree.
Anyway, the rascally squirrel.
Yeah, but it also reminded me of a story from my childhood. There was an outage very similar to this in my neighborhood one year, and I remember seeing it happen, seeing it unfold. A squirrel running across a power line.
Stop.
Bites the power line, explodes.
You saw
no more
this?
Squirrel. I saw it happen.
How old were you, and how traumatic was this?
I was in 4th or 5th grade, so whatever.
You were
age that
young.
would be. Yeah,
Like 9 or 10.
yeah, but that stuck with me. And
Did this affect you as an animal lover?
No, it affected me because I lived a couple streets away from my school, so all the power was out.
Oh. So it was
No,
more
I
of an,
know.
it was more of an
But was there-
inconvenience.
Was there any emotional response you had to this, or was it like, oh my gosh, a squirrel got blown up. This is crazy. This is cool. Or was
Yeah,
it?
it was that.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's 4th or 5th grade boy. That sounds about right.
Yeah.
Matt, what do you have to say?
Well, I have a fun fact about squirrels causing trouble.
Oh dear.
In 1987, a squirrel caused the stock market to crash.
Oh.
And it's worth a Google. But a squirrel got into the computer banks of the NASDAQ stock market and chewed on the key wire causing a complete collapse of the stock exchange at a key time, which led to an economic downfall. I'm not kidding. You could go look. This was big documented history, that caused the stock crash. And they find this chicken fried squirrel in the computer bank.
Chicken fried squirrel.
He was just an early adopter of the Occupy Wall Street movement.
Oh my! This is just more. Everything y'all are saying is only making a stronger case for why Daniel hates squirrels. You guys know Daniel, our marketing media manager here at the Texan, former reporter, hates squirrels. So we'll need to flag this for him to listen to because he doesn't edit the podcast anymore. But also, Brad, tell us about why you spelled squirrel the way you did in the docket here.
I spelled it very incorrectly. It's Squirle in the docket. That is a reference to Travis Kelce, the greatest tight end in history, who is, being benevolent and helping raise the profile of a certain Taylor Swift. As in they are dating, and it is the biggest story in sports right now.
Yeah, it's insane.
Which is unfortunate because Travis Kelce deserves more of the limelight. The greatest tight end in history. Taylor can't say the same about her career. But anyway,
deep breaths.
Despite the fact that she was on everybody's Spotify Wrapped,
and was the global artist of the year.
Oh, she's good. Don't get me wrong. She's just not the greatest ever.
We're not going to debate this. I'm going to let it go. Just
regardless.
finish.
No, go for it.
Regardless,
debate, fight.
Because they started dating. Now all these Taylor Swift fans who don't give a rip about football are looking into Travis Kelce, and they started bringing back up his old tweets from 2009 and 10 when he was a college football player at University of Cincinnati.
Your alma matter, yeah.
My alma mater. And there was one where he was talking.
Start with this, because they went back to make sure that there was nothing offensive or awful that he had tweeted previously.
Because they have adopted themselves, her mother.
Dig up dirt, yes. And what they found was the exact opposite of that.
Yeah, he's a meathead. That's what he is. There's not a lot going on up there. But he's a very pleasant dude. And he tweeted something about, I just gave a squirrel, spelled very horribly wrong, bread, and he just straight smashed it. Had no idea squirrels ate bread like that. Like, what? Also, side note, I have walked the campus that he did, and there is a squirrel problem there. They're all so overweight because students give them fast food all the time. Travis Kelce, way back in ye olden days, was contributing to that.
One of my favorites that he tweeted was, it was just an all caps nap time with like 30 exclamation points. It's like 21-year-old Travis Kelce. Yeah, I just gave a squirrel a piece of bread. Piece is spelled with the E and I rotated incorrectly. And it straight smashed all of it. I had no idea they ate bread like that. Haha, #crazy.
Scandalous.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's...
Wasn't he also like on some dating show where he said something critical about Taylor a long time ago?
No, it wasn't critical, but he was on he had a dating show around his dating life. Yeah, that he said
but he said something along the lines of, it wasn't like he was a fan of Taylor's. I don't remember what it was. I remember all the Swifties were making it float up in Twitter, so you couldn't help but seeing something about it, no matter how much you tried to drown it out.
Yeah.
The message we should take away from this is that Travis Kelce, the greatest tight end of all time, is a fan of squirrels.
Yes. And IHOP
that like
and
to
naps
knock down
and
the power
Chipotle.
grid. Yes.
Those are all things he tweeted about. Okay, well, we have certainly gone too long talking about this, but it was necessary. Okay. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me. I appreciate it. Folks, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Weekly Roundup. We'll catch you next week. Thank you to everyone for listening. If you enjoy our show, rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you want more of our stories, subscribe to The Texan at thetexan.news. Follow us on social media for the latest in Texas politics, and send any questions for our team to our mailbag by DMing us on Twitter or shooting an email to editor@thetexan.news. We are funded entirely by readers and listeners like you, so thank you again for your support. Tune in next week for another episode of our weekly roundup. God bless you, and God bless Texas.